Hi, this is Matt with the Intergalactic Herald. Welcome to my Star Ocean Week in Review podcast. This is podcast number 138. Any articles or videos mentioned can be found on my website at intergalacticherald.com. Look for a weekly recap newsletter 186. So just a quick summary of things to go over this week. Basically a standard Star Atlas week of the Atlas Brew occurring on the past Wednesday, at least if you're in U.S. time zones. Yeah, I guess it could be on a different day if you're in, Asia Pacific. But anyways, so that's pretty much it. So I'll go over that. There was a announcement later in the week from Star Atlas on their Medium page about some changes, community events. So anyways, it wasn't a lot. Anyways, but before I get to that, just a couple of quick things on things I'm doing in Star Atlas. Again, my website, intergalacticherald.com, great resource for many things about Star Atlas, including guides, beginner's guides, different parts of the game. You can get directories, both Star Atlas content creators, guilds, tools, and things like that. I do have my recaps, both my newsletter recap of content this past week in Star Atlas, plus recaps of any of the Star Atlas community team events. And then lastly, if you want to sign up on an email, you can get the announcements from the Star Atlas Discord sent directly to your email. So check all that out at intergalacticherald.com. Do have my Star Atlas merch store. Admittedly, not a lot of selection. Basically, it's gone on hold until other things change. So you can check that out at intergalacticgear.com. And again, I'd love to start a Star Atlas community of gamers that are not joining guilds, Star Atlas gamers. So you can check that out at intergalacticcoalition.com. As far as the content that occurred this past week, as is typical, the Star Atlas Guild published their weekly newsletter of what's going on in Star Atlas, which is a great resource to keep up to. They actually published their 200th issue, so great milestone, and compliments to them for their consistency in putting it out, because they do seem to always grab some little tidbits of information from a lot of sources. So I always put in my weekly recap. You can find a link to that there. As I mentioned, the Star Atlas community team did do their Atlas Brew. As is typical, they had some noteworthy news. They did reiterate that the Zinc blockchain testing is ongoing or has started. No deadline on how long, but again, at least a little bit of news that at least that has started. And then the bulk of the Atlas Brew was dedicated to some things about lore, upcoming, how it relate to, I think it was UE5 update by the end of the year, which again, in some senses, they've done that traditionally, so I guess I didn't think of that as news, but yeah, sounds like they're maybe targeting that. And given actually, now that I think of this through, it's October, they had pretty decent cadence early in the year of once a month, and then they came out with the one in September. But I wonder if they will have any more before this end of the year one. But anyway, so the lore was some things about the Sogmians, which I realized I don't actually remember what faction they are part of. Again, I'll get into talking a little more about lore, but if you've listened to my podcast for a while, unfortunately, lore just, I have a hard time with it. Anyways, so that's pretty much it. They did tease something which then was announced on Friday, that there is a new initiative. I think it's called Iris Blessings. Anyways, they are going to do ongoing double XP weekends in the UE5 game. So I think that is both the shooter and the racing. So you can double up your XP. And again, that XP will be redeemed or dropped for ink, which is a new material component. Not really sure how we classify that has some bearing in the Sage version and definitely in the new C4 that'll be coming. And then they also announced a new monthly drawing that'll occur via showing up at community events, getting codes, and then I guess they have a Discord bot that can, redeem it through it. And then, anyways, I'm not 100% sure because I read the article late. But anyways, there is some monthly drawings that are occurring to that. So that's pretty much it from the past week. And I'll mention later, I actually was quite busy with some other things, so I wasn't really following along Star Atlas this past week. But anyways, so I'll go ahead and go into the next section, which is kind of my thoughts on the state of Star Atlas. And of course, I just alluded to, not much. But definitely, I think the ongoing community engagement sounds really good. It wasn't specifically said this is going to tie into a Zinc rollout, but it felt like when we saw some of the things about how you can earn Zinc, there was some community engagement, so this could be preparing for that. But nevertheless, the first double XP weekend for the UE5 version was well received, and it makes a lot of sense that they would make that an ongoing thing. If, again, for nothing else, it gives people a reason to keep coming back. And then the monthly drawing, I think they had talked about, and maybe they use this bot Discord bot in some capacity for the, Star Atlas Summer. So again, that was where we beefed, and so it makes sense they would do that. Also, I think it's a way to continue keeping community engagement going. Realize they haven't really done anything like that. Golden Carnival going back, I don't know, it feels like a long time. It was last spring, I don't remember. So I think all those things make a lot of sense, and I'm glad to see they're coming up with initiatives that don't require what it sounds like a lot of team members and things like that. Again, the Never Alone campaign, if you've been around for a while, was, I think, a great effort, but unfortunately was tied in with the layoffs, and so it just fizzled and finally just disappeared. And I think we got what did we get? Yeah, we got the things we earned, but we haven't been able to redeem them yet. Yeah, I'm not really sure. Again, it's becoming almost, unfortunately, a distant memory. So anyway, those are the thoughts on those things. And just because I couldn't really think of anything more, I thought maybe I think I've vaguely talked about before, but I thought, might as well talk about it again, because again, the Star Atlas Brew was a lot about lore, which is usually dedicated to a specific lore keepers event, and I'm not sure why they maybe combined them or whatever, but yeah, so I just thought I would maybe expand upon my thoughts on lore a little bit. And first, I want to say I'm obviously do not consider myself at all an expert on video game lore. Completely not something in almost all the games I've ever played. I've been aware of things. So I mentioned in the past that I've played a lot of RTSs, and there's usually description of the factions that are involved, a little bit of backstory, if dating myself, but if you go back to the Command & Conquer series, which were known at the time for their really cheesy, campy, full-motion video, which, of course, nobody would even consider that revolutionary nowadays. But they were over the top. They used actual real actors, and it had a little bit of the humor because it was completely over the top. But you knew which the sides were. Other ones, Age of Empire, for example, which I played, they were historical based, so you didn't really need too much, but they had some real historical figures in there. Other series I liked, Company of Heroes, was World War II based, and yeah, they were not true soldiers, but all the battles were real and things like that. I have not been an RPG person in the past, and I think definitely character-driven and story-driven has a lot more due in that. I remember back in the day when I was listening to more gaming podcasts, PC gaming podcasts, and talking about games like BioShock and, they all was story. And again, excuse me, where's lore, where's story? I don't know if those are just words. I'm going to use them all interchangeably in this kind of rambling thoughts. Yeah, it makes, I think, a lot more. And then you get into the bigger open world games like World of Warcraft and Grand Theft Auto and things like that. So again, story definitely has much more thing in that. But Star Atlas is a sci-fi game, and sci-fi is one of my interests. As I mentioned in the past, that I'm really Star Wars was quintessential to my development of personality and things like that, and watching Star Trek and things like that. And then there are a whole bunch of other ones, just remembered, like things like Aliens and stuff like that. But one thing I realized a lot about sci-fi, at least in those ones I bring up, they weren't initially, first there were stories. Star Wars was just a movie. Star Trek was just a TV show, things like that. So only later did they become, I think, the cultural phenomenons they were and now are pervasive. May the 4th. It's just a date, but again, it's been taken over by that. You could say, no, I was about to say something about comics, but to me, a lot of comics come out of superheroes, which is totally not Star Atlas. Yeah, so I think a lot of the sci-fi things, Battlestar Galactica, TV show that became a second TV show rebooted later on. Yeah, there's a formula, in the sense of TVs and movies and stuff like that, but we all like video games that have things in it that we like, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi or combat or whatever. But if you think of some things like shooter games, for example, yes, they have things, Quake, Unreal Tournament, and there's some reason why you're shooting something. It's really been more about the game mechanics, and you think of more recent games like Call of Duty. Yeah, it's set in different war, modern or previous wars. The actual who does what, again, they're shooters and stuff like that. So I do think, not that sci-fi games can't have story, can't have lore, but again, in other mediums, they were the story first and then they became other things. So again, perfect example, sticking in Star Wars, when you're playing, TIE Fighter X-Wing, which was a flight simulator back in the day. There was an RTS for it. There were definitely the shooter ones, Battlegrounds and things like that. So they just existed within the worlds, but you had already experienced the worlds through a different medium, in this case, movies. I think there's a challenge with Star Atlas that it exists as a new IP, a new property, a new concept, and yet it's trying to be a video game and have lore. Yeah, I don't know. I think that will be a challenge. And moving into kind of more specifics now in Star Atlas, I do think it's been, at least for me, I can't say this for everybody, because again, I think you have to first come from what your perspective is. Some people love this stuff, and some mentioned recently, I've never played Dungeons and Dragons. I'm just not into total fantasy type of stuff. I watched Game of Thrones, but never read the books, didn't read Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, but like the movies, things like that. Yeah, this wasn't me. So I think part of the things, looking back over the last few years now in Star Wars, one, I think it has been hard to keep engaged on the lore aspect. I think the comic book, graphic novel, whatever you want to call it, was a great start, but unfortunately it stopped, and I don't know what the current standing of it is. I think there was this thing, if you bought all the NFT covers, you'd get a physical copy, and yeah, I don't know where that is anymore. Just recently in the Atlas Brew, they were referencing the original posters, which I've have a little more appreciation for, because I'm trying to get those in my merch store as wall art. So I had to find the images, read the descriptions, and yeah, I came in after the poster series, so they weren't part of my Star Atlas introduction. But it was mentioned that some of the lore for this next coming effort is based upon things that occurred on the posters. And again, that's great, that's cool, but those posters were, I think, 4 years ago. I would wonder if a lot of people don't even know they exist. And I know there was lore in Sage. Each starbase had some lore you can click on. Again, I was trying to just figure out the mechanics of moving my ships around, so it wasn't really integrated in a capacity. I did see on Beyond the Horizons videos of Holosym. I mentioned before, I just didn't make the time to play that the tutorials had I don't know if it was AI. Well, let me back up. An in-game character AI that then was helping you figure out how to play. So there was a story-driven plot line as a learning tutorial. And I think that's a great direction to go, because again, it gets you involved. And that's, I think, been no fault of anyone's. That was been the problem with a lot of the gameplay up to date. It was just tech demos and getting forward. Hey, we got a race scene. Why are we racing? Here's the Voliant station was just a showroom. It was just see your ships. The ships all had manufacturers, but that they're just names. Could be Ford and Chevy as opposed to the ones we're using. They didn't do it. So I think there's been obviously a lot of forethought. And in fact, I know that for sure. A couple years ago, I had my one and only, or I guess second interview, first interview with Jose, the lore writer, and it was really insightful, because again, know all this stuff, and I know there's a lore wiki, and I haven't read it. So again, this is just kind of some of probably why I haven't gotten engaged. But again, I'm not sure from a personal standpoint, this is things I would. It wasn't why I came to Star Atlas. And again, we all realize lots of people came to Star Atlas for lots of different reasons, and none of them are better or worse or better. They're all individual. So anyways, yeah, I think a rich lore for Star Atlas makes a ton of sense. Definitely as new characters. There isn't a movie, there isn't a book to build from. This is being built as the game is being built. Definitely the three races is a fundamental concept. Your uniqueness is also, I think, drives well to why you might want a specific crew to play the game. So again, there is a very large vision that I see working, and I think that will probably hold more so as we roll out the next couple projects, in this case C4, which again sounds like some of this stuff that was talked about the last brews coming, definitely the UE5 version. So again, partly to fill up time on this podcast so it wasn't 6 minutes. Those are kind of my thoughts on lore, indirectly we'll just call it story in Star Atlas. So again, totally a fan of, or totally like that it exists. Unfortunately, not a personal fan. But again, same reason why the shooter just doesn't. I'm glad it exists. I probably would play if I had the time. I used to play shooters, but now I was definitely much more interested in the space exploration, space ships, and definitely feeling more, not fully hardcore into the supply chain, but definitely the idea of economy-based gameplay with claim stakes and things like that are things that are just interesting to me. So I'm glad they exist within a larger metaverse of concepts and things like that, that, again, I think if there's anything I could suggest, and I guess this goes back to just I like consuming content, whether that's reading magazines or books or watching TV or listening to podcasts. And if you're listening to this podcast, I come out at one every week, whether it's content filled or not. So this one, I guess we could say it's way more padded, but it's a way to keep up with the game, know what's going on, summarize everything, so that hopefully for you, the listener, this all is interesting. I think same thing could be said for maybe could be a benefit of lore, because unlike the game development, which is more technical in there, that if we did have, and I think again, and it could just literally come down to resources. There was way more, now I remember the Medium articles, Cadet Wynn, I think. Not sure. Can't remember the name. Anyways, there was things that came out on a basis. There was some sort of story. Again, could just come down to lack of staff. Totally get it. But again, yeah, so maybe, again, a lot of this is just becoming a smaller team and things like that. So anyways, yeah, so those are my thoughts on Star Atlas lore. We'll finish this up with my journey playing Star Atlas, and my journey last week was absolutely zero. I had a whole bunch of business stuff that consumed my evenings, and I didn't even log into Discord for a week. Just skimmed it all. I shouldn't even say skimmed it, just marked it all as read last night and start fresh this weekend. So anyway, so yeah, I didn't do anything. Overall, though, I'm still just waiting for Zinc. I think come to the conclusion that's the next thing that I'll get engaged with, and then I'll feel justified in spending more Solana fees to keep mining things. I guess now that I just thought about it, slightly now disappointed that the Mamba X is potentially completely out of range. I don't know. Hopefully maybe they'll put some other ships. I disagree with that. The ships and things is fun, but if they had more ships at different levels, I guess I could consider that fun. Hope that does come true in the short term, but maybe that's something in C4. Still definitely interested in C4 with the expansion of all the different things you can do in the game. So I think that is definitely the interesting thing going forward. UE5, as long as it's ongoing development, I think is, again, a positive sign for the people that like shooting aspect. Again, I think racing's still involved, but we haven't had any esports tournaments on racing type of thing. So anyways, so that's pretty much it. Again, just kind of waiting for Zinc. So thanks for listening. Again, do check out my website, intergalacticherald.com. Got a lot of Star Atlas resources, guides, recaps, directories, news feeds, and things like that. If you want a mug, I got one for you at intergalacticgear.com. Do have a little bit of the wall art if you want some of those original posters. Had started rolling those out, but haven't moved much beyond one or two of the images. And again, if you're a Star Atlas gamer, doesn't want to join a guild, but nevertheless wants to hang out with Star Atlas, other Star Atlas gamers are definitely willing to put together a community for us. So please check out intergalacticcoalition.com. Other than that, hope you had that was a week in review of Star Atlas. Hope you have a great week ahead. This is Matt with the Intergalactic Herald.